Hi John, this is my screencast for my game proposal. I made a short little PowerPoint presentation just to make up some of the dead time. I thought I'd have some uh, visual cues as to what I plan to do, just sort of clarify things a bit and just not have it hovering over a UML diagram or a text file. So my idea for a game, as I discussed in class, is that I plan to have an army simulator, a sort of real-time strategy game to the best of my ability, but I kind of try to simplify it down. The game attributes consists mostly of catering for social players, as there aren't any AI enemies in the game. Everything is just fighting other players, so it's very PvP. Social oriented is a massive part of it. Though there's a definite element that would appeal to killers and achievers, since it takes a lot of strategy to outwit your opponent in sort of rock paper scissors meta game that I introduced and I'll talk about later a bit. But it caters to a wide range, not quite so much to people who like hunting for loot and gearing up, because I have very few items in my game, which I'll also talk about. But yeah, onto the setting. The setting of my game is a pretty bog standard medieval sort of setting. I did this for two reasons. First of all, it fits in with the sort of primitive army type that I think works well. A lot of close quarters combat, so that makes ranged combat less of an issue for me. And secondly, it's a nice classic setting for most games and keeps things nice and simple on my end, on the designing end of that. The player attributes. Player attributes aren't the same as they are in other RPGs, where you have strength, dexterity, health, and so on. Instead, I opted for an army design, and each unit basically fulfills a specification such as armor or whatever. I'll just show you here. Here are the units. As you can see here, this is the footman. He serves as the more defensive role. He's got the highest defense capability, and his unit cap is the highest, meaning that you could have about 50 footmen, and they will basically stonewall any enemies that try to harass your weaker but more damaging units. This is the archer then. He's the only ranged unit, and his range is about 6 squares, I think. So he can do damage from far away, but he's very weak and will not stand up to a lot of punishment up close. He's also the lowest unit cap, which means that if you lose them early on, you're pretty screwed for the rest of the game. And then on the last one is of course the cavalry. He's sort of the mid-level unit. He's very quick. His range is mid-level, or rather I should say his attack range is at mid-level. His movement range is the furthest, so he can harry and harass opponents from a distance away and then retreat, sort of for a guerrilla-like tactic. Now, each player can build their army to whatever specification they like. They can decide how many units they want to have by changing the unit cap, though by default the unit cap for the footman will be the highest, the archer will be the lowest, and the cavalry will be somewhere in between. So that means that the player can design the army to their play specifications and how they want to approach battle. This gives a bit of freedom, but they still have to play within the confines of the rules that I set up. Item attributes. Items don't play as big a role in this as it might in some other sort of pen and paper based RPGs that have inspired so many text-based adventures. But basically, each platoon, a platoon being one of these three unit types, can carry one item, and this item only does passive, only has a passive effect on the army. For example, a banner that the footmen might hold could increase their movement speed by 25% or something like that. So it doesn't have a massive effect on the game, so it doesn't completely unbalance everything, but it still gives an advantage to the player who has it. Items will be found on random tiles, since there aren't any enemies to kill to get them from. Instead, items will just be scattered around the map that they can pick up if they come across them as they play. Enemy attributes and spawning. Well, as I said before, there aren't going to be any AI enemies, so enemy attributes are basically just the same as player attributes, except that each player builds their army differently, so that you aren't going to be faced with the same layout every time, which adds a bit of spice to it. So that's sort of the only attribute I can attest to that. Spawning, spawn blocks are going to be set up all around the edge of the map. I did this for two reasons. The first is just so that it gives everyone a fair chance that when they spawn they won't get mobbed and all die. It also makes a much calmer experience at the start so that people can get their bearings instead of just being thrown into this sort of maelstrom of death and carnage if all the enemies or all the armies were to be spawned at the same location. Another reason is it gives them a bit of a reason to explore a bit, to find the other players rather than just sort of, travel 3 squares to the left and then there you go. So, on to the map then. Uh, The terrain of the map will consist of 4 types of tiles. The first one is the plain tile. Oh, also each of these tiles has an effect on the unit that stands on them. For example, on a plain tile, the units can move faster. This is especially good for cavalry who already have a fast moving speed, but this gives them a really big extra boost. The way that this works is that no matter what tiles surround the tile that the player is on, he gets the benefits from that tile that he's on. So if he was on a plain tile surrounded by rocky tiles, he can still get the range benefit for movement that the plain tile gives. So the plain tile, as I said, gives a 25% extra range for what the player can move. This adds 25%, the rocky terrain that is, adds 25% extra defense so that it's easier to defend on rocky terrain. Hilly terrain gives you higher ground, therefore you have a longer range for your attacks. Mountain, you can't do anything. You can't move onto a square that has a mountain terrain on it. This is simply because I wanted to be able to cordon off some areas, as I said earlier, so that it's good for players to sort of find their feet in their immediate surroundings before venturing out past the mountains. Also creating passes and sort of ravines and that sort of thing as for strategic elements that I think the game would do nicely with. So that's it. Then of course there are the normal tiles, which I didn't have a little picture for, but the normal tiles are just tiles that add no benefit and have no drawback. So that's it. Combat, that's where the meat of it happens. Since it's a war game, a lot of it depends on the combat. The way I was looking at it is that player's uh, each unit has a base attack stat, which is then augmented by a random number generated by between 0 and 30. Um, the random number generated and the base attack stat added together gives the overall attack stat, and that is compared against the defense stat, which is basically the base defense stat and a random number generated between 0 and 30. And if the attack stat is greater than the overall defense stat, then that attack lands, and a random number between 0 and 20 is generated to determine how many units died from the unit that got attacked. This is sort of a very simple way of determining casualties in these skirmishes, and it also gives a nice little play dynamic with the randomness, the sort of chance element that there is. I mean, you could have land a successful attack but not do any damage, and that's a distinct possibility, which also adds a bit of spice to the proceedings, I think. In order to prevent people from just spamming attacks on other players, I want to include a timer that only lets you attack once every 30 seconds or so. So you have to really pick your moment to attack and make sure that you have the highest possible chance of success. I'm also including a timer on the movement rate of your unit. This is also so that it limits that people can't just harass you and move in and out at lightning speed. I will, however, be making the movement the cooldown period for cavalry lower than the other two. Archers will probably have the highest movement cooldown time since they will be the slowest units. I also do this to sort of emulate the classic turn-based strategy elements that I think this takes a lot of influence from. So that's more or less a truncated version of the combat. More is, of course, in my Word document that I submitted. Now on to the commands. Here are the basic commands for the basic user. Who, this command just prints out a list of users who are currently on server. Chat, this followed by the message is basically a way to put a message on the server, just talk to anyone really. Whisper, this you have to enter the whisper command, then the username, then the message. This command allows the player to send a message to a specified user, so if you want to team up or strategize or just taunt someone personally. Experience, this experience command brings up the user's current level of experience. I also forgot to mention that armies can level up, but instead of just applying it to attribute, you apply it to units, and that unit's base stats all raised by 1, as well as the total amount of units in the battalion or platoon or whatever, the group of units. This happens each level, so experience is pretty valuable. Inventory, this just you specify the unit and then it prints out what items, if any items, are attached to the unit that you specified. Drop, this you have to enter the drop command, then followed by a unit. This command makes the unit that you specified drop any items that they're holding, and that will be left on the tile. Pick up, this just does the opposite. You pick up an item that was left on the tile for a unit that you specify, of course. Look describes the tile type that the unit is on, and also a sort of vague description of the tiles surrounding the unit, so that it has sort of a lay of the land, and if there are any enemies nearby, they're easily spotted. Attack, this you have to specify the unit and then the coordinate of the tile that you want to attack. If you type in look beforehand, it will give you the coordinates of all the tiles surrounding you and any enemies that might be on those tiles. So that's how you specify which unit attacks which other unit. Move, you have to specify the unit and then what coordinate you want them to move to. This is also dependent on the range, the movement range of the unit, as well as attack is dependent on the attack range of the unit. Help, this just prints out a list of commands that the user is able to do. And quit, this is basically just removing the user from the server. Now on to how will players connect. Oh, here, of course, sorry, I forgot. Admin user commands. The admin user can announce or send a priority message, just sort of like a little prefix saying this is an official announcement, and then it prints out as much the same as the chat command does. Change rank, the admin user can promote other users to admins, or in fact demote them. Restart, this just restarts the whole excuse me. This restarts the whole server, and shutdown just shuts the server down. The guard user can kick off any player, as well as having the admin user's command at his disposal. How players will connect to the game. A player enters an IP address for the server, and then the port number for the listening socket. Data is just then sent to the socket, and when they are actually on the server, they're asked to enter the username and password. If they don't have a username and password, they just create one and then they're on their way. What the logger will be used for, the logger is simply to log when users log in and out of the game. Any official announcement that are sent are logged in. If there are crashes on the server, that's logged. And if players were kicked off, that's logged as well, just to see the trends that form. When a server crashes, an exception has to be called. All users then need to be disconnected gracefully rather than just sort of thrown off the server. A message is then sent to apologize and said that the problem is being looked at. The parser is something I looked at that I think, as I mentioned, you can see in my commands that there's the different words to different things. So it's going to track the amount of words by tracking the amount of white spaces. and then dependent on the first word, it will look for either